So, hello everybody. It's a great pleasure to be here live at MPE 2025 in Berlin today with my guests. We're going to talk about embedded payments. Very quickly, I'm Dr. Ruth Wandhöfer, CEO of Lexima, and I'm actually the chair of MPE going forward. And I have with me in the studio today Mathieu Altweg, the Senior Vice President, Head of Product and Solutions at Visa Europe, and Maurice Jongmans, the CEO of Online Payments Platform. Welcome, gentlemen. So let's talk about one of the hot topics this week, which is embedded payments. And I'll first direct my first questions to Maurice. How is embedded payments really transforming the customer experience over the next few years? We've seen it with Uber many years ago, but surely this is now taking it to the next level.
Well, I think we will see the platformification of the whole environment moving forward, and that comes with the embedded payment as well. So customer experience will change, where people and consumers will much more start their search for their products on platforms or on marketplaces. We see the retailers, large brands moving into marketplaces space, having the other brands and other products on their web shop, creating marketplaces, and that will come with a payment solution as well. And I hope that setup that we will also see payments getting more integrated, better integrated, and more efficient for everyone.
Excellent. So nobody really sees the payment, but it's the experience in the online shopping environment that sort of ultimately, hopefully, leads to merchants be paid, which is kind of helpful, right?
Yeah.
Great. So Mathieu, from a Visa perspective, how do you see, I guess also what Visa does in the embedded payment space changing with the customer experience going forward?
No, I think we're trying to enable for merchants to take advantage of these new experiences. But very concretely, when we think about what's coming, and I mentioned it earlier today in the keynote, we really think that the role of identity as a wide term would play to improve that consumer experience. We think that identity comes first versus payment. And if we do that, then you better understand who the consumer is. You can customize that discover to buy journey for that consumer. And then you can also enable multiple payment choice or option. And so that's one. And then we think that we are now across markets in different levels of maturity into a multi-rail reality where multiple funding source, multiple payment rails are actually made available to the consumer. And so as a network, we want to really distribute that choice at the endpoint. So e.g., every single merchant can benefit from that. And I think marketplaces play a big role into that because they are actually providing the tools for the merchants, because it's hard, to bring that strong authentication up front. It's hard to consume a new form of token that will have these rich data attached to it, which we're working on. And it's hard to also, present all these different payment options and choice to the consumer if you are a merchant. And so I love the marketplace models and the platforms that enable that, because these are concentrated place of commerce, and they can enable the merchants to take advantage of these new capabilities and new form of experience much faster than having to solve it for themselves. So that's a couple of things that we are working on, and we think we're going to be, as an industry, starting to roll out to the consumer.
Yeah, maybe just as a perspective, it's quite mind-boggling how much multi-rail activity is going on. People talk about new asset classes, stable coins, potentially central bank digital currencies next to commercial bank money. And also the question as to whether eventually some of those will be the winners, because I guess at the moment we see too much innovation, but not necessarily the efficiency on consolidation. But the platform model is clearly the one where you can bring it all into one, and then people just choose and you see what the choices are. Maybe moving to the next question then, Maurice, what are we seeing as new opportunities in terms of embedded payments, whether it's revenue, product innovation, technology innovation? What are the sort of exciting new opportunities there?
Well, I think we also see that we get much more sellers, much more merchants in all those environments, and whether it's a marketplace or a platform. So, and as well as consumer sellers, people reselling their stuff, people buying from other consumers, and that all combined creates
Vintage stuff, right?
For
I've been on
example,
vintage, I have to admit.
But I think that is really the consumer to consumer
Yeah.
only. But I think we see consumer sellers all out over other marketplaces or platforms, or even just large brands adding consumer sellers to their own web shop. And that means we have to look at merchant in a much wider perspective, and that we must cater to also consumer merchant in all these environments. And that's an important step you need to create these experiences. And with consumer merchants, you get also a different dynamic for payments. I always say the moment the consumer has received his money, getting that back with like chargeback processes is like unrealistic even, because they don't expect that they've sold something, that there is a reason
Yes.
to refund.
Selling my shoes, I really don't want that money to disappear again.
Exactly.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And you sold
Buy
your
new
shoes.
pair.
Yeah, you sold your shoes. They were paid for. You sent them correctly.
Yeah.
You don't expect anything to happen with your money after that. And that's where we have to rethink some of the current payment methods if you use them for consumers or the model. So that's going to be an interesting one as well. But as Mathieu already said, integrating that in the marketplace environment will help all of these merchants transact and make it safe and easy.
Right. So we really see everybody going into the digital world, whether it's a consumer or the small merchant or the big merchant, and everybody has slightly different behavioral expectations. And all of this somehow needs to be catered for in terms of the channel and options that are being presented to the customers.
I think, Maurice, you made a good point. It's true that it comes with the challenges of that multi-rail reality, where not every rail, not every payment options is the same. What does that mean? And consumers, similar to merchants, merchants want to run a business or run their craft, and then maybe use someone to take care of the business part of their craft. And then consumers, they want to sell their shoes, buy their shoes, and don't worry too much about it. But they also have ideas of where their funds are parked and which sources they can use, and some level of protections or additional value that belongs to the different payment option. I think that's a big role for the industry to play, is to create that, one, ensure that we have the right level of protections across consumer. Because you mentioned, Maurice, a couple of use cases. We see, experimentation across new rails for certain, types of purchase. If you do an irrevocable payments using account to account for a forward-looking or future delivery of service, e.g. a travel purchase, there is risk there in the economy, because there is not the right level of protection that is attached to that specific payment instrument for that specific purchase. So we also the early days of that multi-rail reality, and as an industry, we're going to need to educate. We're going to need to put the right trust mark, and obviously, a lot of the things that we do as a scheme and as a network. And as you know, we're branching out beyond cards, because we know that consumers will want to express their choice in these multiple options. But we also know that if we don't, add the right layer of security, understanding, trust, ways of managing what happens if something goes wrong with the transaction, we're not gonna, fulfill what consumer expect. So a big thing for the industry to work on as this multi-rail reality really, starts to explode. Yeah.
And you mentioned a little bit earlier, Mathieu, the sort of digital identity piece. I wonder, given that everybody has been talking about digital identity for so long, and I'm not going to hijack the topic, but how do you see this being implemented in a viable, secure way that also mitigates the risk of identity theft, which we do see so frequently in the e-commerce world?
Yeah, it's a vast topic, and there's
Only 1 minute.
Yeah, there are many dimensions to digital identity. There are deterministic and probabilistic ones. There are government-backed ones. So which is good, and the industry continues to evolve. I think we see more recently a movement from centralized to decentralized identities and the emergence of verifiable credentials as the main standards. So we're going to see more of what we call identity wallets playing a part. They can be backed by government, they can be backed by bank consortium, they'll be backed by some form of strong sources of truth or strong sources of data. So that's going to happen. And then I think we then need to be able to tap into these identities in a way that doesn't, hurt the consumer experience. Ideally, you take them up front, so you understand who the consumer is. Ideally, you can have access to a profile, an understanding of that consumer, fully consented, and in a way that's anonymized or feels the right way for the consumer. And so I think you're going to see a combination of these big decentralized identities, government-backed or bank-backed, emerging, really being made available. And then you're going to see the merchant side, the seller side, taking advantage of that. And there'll be easier way to consume them. So it's not going to look like a big redirect. It's going to be much more seamless. It's going to be, one-time biometric authentication that not only unlocks, hey, great, this is Maurice and I know this is Maurice, but suddenly Maurice actually likes, vintage clothing. And so here is a bunch of vintage clothes. I think we're going to see more of that. The expression of that across markets is gonna differ and change a little bit. But I think it's going to be socialized, and we're going to start seeing that really being democratized shortly. I think it starts with authentication, because that's the use case that we in the payment space have been really pushing, because identity authentication and payment has been there from the beginning. But I think what we will replace is that, or we will basically have access to that rich identity data at the same time. And so we'll be able to make use of it.
It's really to fight fraud going forward, because that's the big stumbling block, but just to have a little diversion. Okay, let's move on to partnerships. Which partnerships are essential to accelerate embedded payments, starting maybe with you, Maurice?
Well, I think we touched upon a couple of them already in this short time, because it's the network to start with. It's the combination of the payment providers that need, identity providers as well to also do know your customer and all the regulatory compliance that you want to have in place, especially with this larger growing group of merchants that need all attention as well. So you have that in place, and then you get to the different payment methods, which we touched already. How can we get those mostly adapted to each individual seller group or buyer group? Because the combination, as I said before, a consumer to a consumer transaction has a very different dynamic, also for the payment method than a business to a consumer transaction. How do we cater that, and how do we get that organized in the current setup? That will require also those schemes or those payment methods to think along with their solutions. You said, for example, for if you book a trip that will happen later, a holiday or anything, then we have to find, we do as OPP as well, we keep the money with OPP until the date of the actual trip, which works for consumers very well. But it's harder for a business, because they won't get the money up front, and some of them need part of that. So it's new models for those payment methods that we need to work on together with those partnerships.
Right.
Yeah.
Mathieu, anything quick to add on?
No, I think you see today at MPE, and over the next couple of days, the space is busy. There's new partners, new players that taking part and adding value along the value chain. I think we don't really see more consolidation, in certain areas of the value chain, but the value chain itself is becoming more complex. An interesting topic around that discover to buy is agentic commerce. I mentioned it a little bit in the keynote earlier. These are net new players that didn't exist, even 2 years ago. And they're going to play a massive role introducing agents that are going to start interacting on behalf of consumers to initiate, purchase, to look for items across marketplaces and across a much larger inventory, and being able to do that very, very fast, and yet also have that responsibility to, execute the payment on behalf. So these are just an example of new partners that even a year ago you would never really think about in the context of commerce and payment, and they're going to come into the picture. So yeah, it's exciting times, but I see more than less.
Great reference to the future here, because I was going to end on where do you see embedded payments heading towards? And you just mentioned effectively agentic AI, which is the machine is talking to the machine and is doing stuff on my behalf, finding the cheapest pair of boots from that particular brand in the whole World Wide Web, which is, I'm waiting for that to send it out. But I guess, of course, the cyber risk coming into this, because I'm going to talk about in an hour, because, of course, this will be a new surface to attack. But where do you see the future going, Maurice? Anything to sort of add on to this excitement?
Well, yeah, exactly. As said before, the AI coming into play, it's definitely going to change a lot in the future. That's going to change how people shop online, how it's presented, but also how it's handled and how it's shipped and paid for. Because in the end, it needs to be shipped and needs to pay for. That's for sure.
We still have
that
a
will not
physical
change
element in the world, right? That's right.
That won't change. So we need to have that in place,
Yeah.
and everything evolving around that, finding ways to make it exactly more efficient, easier, seamless, but also safe and secure. I think that's exactly what you say, the challenge, making sure it keeps safe and secure.
Yeah. So it's all change in a digital world for embedded payments, but more to come this week and in the future. Thank you so much for listening to our MPE Embedded Payment podcast, and enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thank you.
Thank you.